to have so many people in the room together. So it's not virtual or Zoom session anymore. So global pandemic is the latest uncertainty that we all have been experiencing. And given, we all have to wear masks and other thing, we know that it's not quite over. Now, this pandemic is not the only uncertainty. It's not the first one. And it's also not the last one. And it's not the only one. If you think about the last couple of years, we had to deal with a war, supply chain issues, cyber security issues, natural disasters. The list goes on and on. So these uncertainties have really taught us valuable lessons. And those lessons are informing us and our future strategy as leaders. The technology executives and technology leaders have really, really stepped up to the game and really shaped the future of their businesses and helped them in a many ways that is changing the world forever. So I'm really excited on this topic, how to plan for the uncertain. And I'm very excited to have an esteemed set of colleagues with me on stage discussing this very topic. And I hope to learn from their insights and all the things they are doing to not only helping their companies to get through this uncertain period, but more importantly, positioning their company for a massive paradigm shift that's happening and making their companies successful. Each one of them represent a very large, multinational, complex organization. And each one of them really have done an amazing job over the past couple of years, which you will hear from them. So first, let me introduce the panelists here. So first, Andy, very good to see you.
Likewise, thank you, Mohammad.
Andy Karaboutis, she's the Group CIO of National Grid. Now, National Grid is a very large multinational utility company, which I did not realize is how innovative that company is. And we'll hear more about that from Andy. So Andy brings a very interesting perspective, both as a CIO, technology executive of a large organization, but also many different industries. Well, I was very happy to see that Andy and I shared the same industry because she worked for both GM and Ford for many years as senior technology leader. Also worked for Michael Dell at the Dell Computer as a CIO. Then she also worked at Biogen. So many different industries, many different companies, very key roles. Also, she served on a number of large public company boards, and she's currently serving on a couple of boards. So great, we'll really enjoy hearing from her and hearing from different perspectives. So next to me is Mona. Mona, very good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Mona and I have been communicating, working over the last couple of years virtually, so it's good to see you in live today. Mona is the CIO and the digital officer for Collins Aerospace. And again, I did some research. Collins is a massive organization, almost 64,000 people, I think. It's very large, many countries, huge operation. So Collins is part of Raytheon. And before being the CIO in the current role, Mona was the CIO for Raytheon Missile Defense System. So she's very empathetic and very supportive and very focused on ESG. I really saw that, the D&I and
yes,
ESG, that's
absolutely.
really wonderful there. And also multiple award winner. So very excited to have you on the stage and hearing from your experience for the last few years. And again, some of the things you're working on.
Thank you.
Last, certainly not least, is Vagesh. Vagesh and I, Vagesh Dabe, he's the CIO of McDermott International. Now, Vagesh and I recently met, but we're quickly becoming friends. It's partly because I have an office in Dallas, and he has an office in Houston, so we have the Texas connection. But he also lived in Dallas, working for the same industry that I was in for a while. McDermott International is, again, very large organization with 54 countries of operation. It's engineering and construction in the energy sector. Very diverse, very global organization, and you've been there for almost 7 years. So again, fascinating story when you and I talked before, and I'm looking forward to continuing that discussion. So what I'd like to do is first start with Andy. So the interesting thing is, I was hearing a presentation from you from 2019, and you're talking about how to look at the future and what some of the things National Grid was doing. And the future is now. So my question for you is, in hindsight, what you wish you had done differently or better to go through the pandemic better than you have? Because you, again, Astronaut Grid has done an amazing job over the last couple of years. But was there anything else you could have done differently?
Well, I would have imagined a pandemic if I had done the futuring exercise correctly, right? But who would have ever thought we would have been there? That's a great question, Mohammad. So, first of all, in hindsight, I think we all, as CIOs and CDOs, take a victory lap because I didn't hear of many companies that fell down, right? It took a lot of pulling together, upgrading, doing, et cetera, to get each of our organizations mobilized to work from home. So I always say, as CIOs, we should take that victory lap. In hindsight, the thing that I would have done different is really understood the personas of all the employees that we had in the company. Because you think everyone goes home. They need a laptop, they need their monitors, they need connectivity, we need to make sure that they can. But what you don't think about is, do we explicitly on day one know the personas of help desk people or people that need high compute or people that need low touch, et cetera. So as you do disaster recovery and business continuity, we never think about just everyone goes home. Do we know all the personas and how many of them we have? And I think that's one thing that I would have thought of differently, only because it probably would have lessened the snowstorm mentality and sort of been much more, though we were quite fast, but much smoother, but we got there, so.
That's great. Either of you, any thoughts on that topic or question?
I'll just add, instead of additional personas, I wish I knew the personas, some of the applications were very, very sensitive to latency.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have an engineer working in a suburb of India and Indonesia, he's not going to get the same experience from connectivity that the engineer in London is getting. So I can make him work more efficiently, but how do I get that last mile problem solved for them when they're working on high compute requirement, very memory intensive applications, engineering applications.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is we ran as a very lean organization. We did not stock the shelves with extra hardware, whether it's laptops or peripherals or cameras or what have you. And so I wish if we had stocked the shelves a little bit more, but we learned through the pandemic to really adapt very quickly and to go to new vendor sources in order to get the demand that we needed. So just looking back, lean is good, but do have some contingency plans.
That's a great point. So just-in-time inventory, that was a big thing when I went to grad school, and I think that no longer probably relevant anymore with the supply chain disruption. People are piling up tissue paper, and even the baby food supply shortage right now is just crazy what's going on. In our industry, the biggest thing was we didn't expect this massive demand for used cars. And if you think about, the pandemic, people are staying home, nobody's traveling. I don't understand why everybody's trying to buy new cars. So that created a significant demand, and with shortage of cars initially, then we solved that problem. But that's interesting. So Vagesh, let me come back to you. How has the recent uncertainty, especially the last couple of years, changed your approach to planning for potential future disruption? For example, obviously we didn't know about the pandemic, and we survived, and we actually at the end of it almost. But how are you doing differently? How are you planning now? What is your approach has been now?
So Shamim, when I look at the last few years, McDermott was lucky. We were very early in our digital journey, and where we operate, we are a very global company. So early on, we were looking at solutions to how folks virtually connect, collaborate with our customers, mainly for optimization reasons. And when pandemic came, it just accelerated some of those tools and adoption of the tools. But now one of the key things I'm looking at is building some shock absorbers in my just the ecosystem and create resiliency. And that starts with employees. It's just very important to have resilient employees, because when times like this come, your group of IT employees or your engineers are working really long hours, and they're working to solve the supply chain challenges. And you gotta have that core resiliency in your organization. Second thing I'm doing is listen. Your partners, your customers, your suppliers, employees, because they are the ones who will tell you really where you have chunks in your armor. They see things break before you do, right? They'll give you some of the leading indicators where you want to focus on.
That's good. I love the shock absorber analogy because, Andy and I both have automotive background, so
right.
that's definitely,
We understood that.
right. It made perfect sense. Let me come back to you, Mona. So going through all this uncertainty I shared, and obviously global pandemic itself is very challenging, right? But you had to deal with something even bigger, which is merging two largest company in your industry, the biggest merger in the history of your industry. So tell us a little bit about what people, process, and architecture changes you made before, during, or after the pandemic that helped you go through all these uncertainties over the last couple of years.
Great question. Yeah, and for those of you who haven't followed Raytheon Technologies, in 2019 we announced the biggest merger in the history of aerospace and defense. So before the pandemic, we were heads down, focused on planning this massive merger. And it's not only the company mergers, we were also consolidating business units within. And so, we were focused on day one, making sure the merger happens successfully, bridging the company networks together, making sure our enterprise is secure, ensuring our employees are going to get paid on day one, and able to collaborate and communicate. So that was our focus, before the pandemic to ensure successful merger. And day one was planned for April 3rd, 2020, which is right in the beginning of when the pandemic hit. And so the team was incredibly resilient. We kept the merger planning. In fact, day one went without a hitch. It was very successful. But obviously, in the midst of that, we had to pivot and start planning for the pandemic. And at that time, nobody knew how long it was going to go. I recall on March 13 of 2020, it was a Friday afternoon, I got a call from my boss, one of the business presidents at the time, and he said, on Sunday night, we are announcing that we're taking the business remote. And my first answer was, everybody? He's like, yes, everybody. And so obviously, we had to pivot. We had to make sure we have the network capacity, remote access capabilities, so we can ready the business for remote work. And our company, we have a lot of manufacturing. We have a lot of classified government type work where you can't go work at home. So we really had to cater to on-site workers as well as remote workers and make sure we're taking care of the safety of our employees who had to stay on site while enabling our remote workforce. So as we talked already, about just making sure our employees had the collaboration tools, the hardware, the peripherals, the things that keep them safe but productive at the same time. We had to partner with suppliers a little bit differently. We had to augment our service desk practices because just with the volumes, they couldn't scale. So we had to establish local command centers where we can be more responsive to our employees. So that was kind of during the pandemic. Fast forward to now, our company embraces hybrid work. We believe that's here to stay, and we believe it can be mutually beneficial to the employees and the company. So right now, post-pandemic, some of the things we're looking at is what did we learn from the pandemic period? Revisiting our business continuity plans, our disaster recovery plans to say, what else can we do in order to anticipate? Hopefully there won't be another pandemic, but whatever that next disruption or next unknown is. From a technology perspective, making sure we have resiliency in our systems. Where do we need to add capacity, but also layered defenses. So a lot of lessons from the pandemic that we're applying going forward.
That's great. I mean, again, I was thinking about this, how two big companies like that coming together during this pandemic where everybody's working differently. So there's quite congratulations on getting through that process.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to stay with you and then come to you, Andy. So obviously, this pandemic and all the uncertainty we couldn't have predicted, but we're surviving. We're actually at the end of it. So what is the number one disruption you are thinking about and planning for now?
This is not new. It's an enduring priority for us is the security, cybersecurity, and compliance of our enterprise. given the industries that we serve, the government and defense markets, as well as the aviation industry, where cybersecurity and just compliance with a lot of the different regulations are paramount for us. So this is not new, but obviously, not a day goes by that we don't see a headline, whether it's ransomware or some sort of, cyber incident that unfortunately is bringing many companies down to their knees. So we're very, very proactive in that space. It is something that keeps me up at night as CIO. The good news is we have good frameworks, good practices, good talent, and I'm constantly asking myself, do we know the landscape of our IT landscape? Do we understand our architectures? Do we understand our critical assets? Unfortunately, in cyber, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. If an incident happens, can we respond to it? Can we identify, detect the threat, and neutralize it? And again, talent is a big imperative as well. So cyber and compliance is, an enduring priority and goal for us, and we're consistently preparing for that.
Yeah, cyber is an interesting one because all of your companies are critical infrastructure, right? So prime target for all the bad actors. So that's a very good point. Andy, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I will add to that. So first of all, listening to Mona talk about people that couldn't go home, we actually had to buy trailers for people and sequester them because the lights can't go out. Hospitals go out. It's critical national infrastructure, as we all have. So there was a lot more to just the technological aspects of it. It was keeping safety and keeping people on the ground working. So anticipating the future, Mohammad, that's a great question. Both my colleagues here said resilience, and resilience is ever so important, but it's defensive. And so we do defense in depth, we do zero trust for cybersecurity, we worry about all those things. But you'll never guesstimate, you'll never guess what the next disruption could be. You could say geopolitical, you could say another pandemic, but we don't know. None of us would have said pandemic 2 years ago. So one of the areas that I'm focusing on is that flexibility and building muscle to react to things you can't imagine. So it's know all your assets. I mean, it's sort of like a sports game. You can keep, rehearsing and doing that marathon run and getting ready for that big Olympic game, but you don't know what your competition has done, right? So you have to build that flexibility to say, what position am I in to react? How flexible am I in pivoting from a position that I think is the right position? And so what that entails is building hugely strong capabilities, knowing all your assets. Vagesh said that earlier, understanding your applications, know where the world is, not just being a good technology person, right? No more the day that the CIO or CDO can be a technology person. It's a huge business person that understands geopolitical and understands the landscape out there and being able to do what-if analysis. Some of us have risk committees at our companies. Most of us probably have risk committees at our company. But what we don't do, and most of us have disaster recovery and business continuity efforts, but what we don't do is futuring. Imagine a world where this happens. As crazy as it might sound, what do we do? And I did this in my company, and we said, well, we would get on Teams and call each other. Teams is down, it's gone, it's crashed. Well, then we'd get on a phone. The cell lines are down. What do you do? And all of a sudden, you start backing yourself into scenarios you never thought of. And so those are the kind of things that we do as those exercises.
That's such a great point, Andy, on disaster recovery and business continuity. Our disaster recovery plans were 50 pages long, right? But there was no playbook for the pandemic, right? And so, what have we learned? And to your point, it can't be static, it has to be adaptive. And putting it into practice, that's another lesson learned, and kind of looking forward. Are we spending enough time doing the tabletop exercises, simulating those scenarios, so we can really we can with confidence know that we can react and adjust? So great point there.
Yeah, I think the conversation around the scenario planning and it's gotten much easier because before we had to convince people like this can happen. Now with all the uncertainties, I think we have a lot more allies now
Yeah.
in our colleagues in C-suite and boardrooms actually for planning and preparing for the uncertainties that before would have been probably a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So, Vagesh, let me come back to you. I think continuing this theme here, the technology strategy itself looks very different today than it did 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So what technology strategy changes are you making to prepare for next set of uncertainties or disruptions?
So I'm going to build upon what Andy said, right? It's around that elasticity. And knowing your ecosystem, your environment, and say, where do I need to be more elastic? And what I learned is we have a lot of technology debt. A lot of areas where we require modernization, right? So it's really investing there. And I talked about some of the applications where very, very sensitive latency. We're working with those vendors now and say, guys, you have to now change and modernize your software so it works for us in certain environments. And then look at dependencies where I have in supply chain. Say, can I leverage cloud? Can I leverage some other technologies out there? There are a lot of niche players right now, a lot of startups. We're actually exploring a few of them to say, can you help us in this area? Because there's no big player kind of provides some of those solutions. And really just kind of think differently, think that days of incremental changes are gone. Now you have to have a paradigm shift and really kind of disrupt and think just in a totally different way to implement things. And technology allows that. I mean, that's a fascinating time that right now the pace of technology and the changes are so rapid. Things I couldn't do last year using AI or cloud computing, I can do today.
Great. Being a global company, again, all of you have multiple countries and different entities to work with. What additional complexity did that bring to you during the last couple of years?
Let me build upon what Andy said. She talked about this persona of workers. And for us, it was a huge learning lesson because certain countries, they had one computer, but the child was using it for homework. They only had one monitor. So how do you now provide that employee? And when you're an engineer, you're used to 2 big monitors at work. How do you provide the same working environment? We operate in some countries where they did not have a computer at home. And we had to kind of run around, right? You talked about trying to find some of those assets. I basically told people, just go find them, rent them, lease them, and do it fast before others do it. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting learning lesson, just kind of looking at the global span we operate and how unique each of the situation was.
Yeah, I would just say, Shamim, we have to follow the local regulations. We are a global company, a lot of sites around the globe. Different countries have different rules and regulations. So it was really important to observe what's happening on the ground and empower our employees to really adapt in order to keep their workforce, productive but safe at the same time. So we've had, some of the same experiences, you're talking about here. But what we're finding going forward is there is no one size that fits all. You have to address it site at the time, country at the time, but do have some guardrails to make sure you don't divvy too much away from the standards and some of the norms. Just paying attention to what's going on locally and empowering that workforce locally.
That's great. So some valuable lessons there. So I'm coming back to you, Andy. So all your career, you've been a very innovative leader, not just a technology leader, but a business leader. So as you, again, think about the future, shift less about the past, is more around the future, where we're going and how can we prepare ourselves. So what emerging technologies or innovations are you evaluating, piloting that will impact your basically future success for the company? Anything you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so I think the emerging technologies that we're all sort of looking at, Internet of Things, everything that ties everything to data and physical world to the virtual world and exposes data. Because the data is, and it sounds trite, but it's what we all talk about. The data is what's going to provide the insights that we need in order to move to disrupt ourselves or to the next generation of what we're doing. Ironically, that's also creating the threat vectors that make us worry about the defensive posture as well. So you have to raise the water level, if you will, around innovative technologies to help disrupt your business and also ensuring that you've got the security and the controls and the wherewithal around that technology. And it's making our jobs more and more and more difficult. And so it requires an agility, and it requires a transparency and a clarity that I don't think we've had before. You know, back to and it ties to this question, but you know, the question that you just asked Vagesh around, you know, this disruption, what does it mean, and how would we read the future? It's also around operating models and teams. It's not just around the technology. So one of the things that I've also learned is know the product owners for each of your products. Know who the teams are and what they're accountable for. We just moved to a product operating model at National Grid in order to deliver more capability faster and agile ways of working. But it's also a defensive play, and it's also a play for the future as we're trying to increase these platforms that give us the data that we need. So just wanted to throw in a little bit of how important the operating model and roles and responsibilities are on all of this.
That's great. You touched upon something there around data, right? And actually, I'm going to tie that into one of the audience question here around AI, because that's in all our lives now. So the question I'm going to read, and then any of you can jump in and answer. What might be potentially serious unknowns from the widespread use of powerful AI systems? What should we do to anticipate them? I think that's a great question. So who wants to go first?
I'll go, but I'll keep it brief on that question. I mean, when you think about the products and what we deliver to our customers, you're talking defense solutions, where I think there is a lot of opportunity around AI, machine learning, but human in the loop is very important. So it's really how do you bring the human, mind and capability to AI, machine learning, type capability, and make sure they operate together. But I think this is the world that we anticipate.
Ethics is really important, right? There's a book out there. It's Life 3.0, maybe it's Life 4.0, and I missed the last life. I don't remember, but it actually talks about these models and algorithms and machine learning and what we create, and then those taking over. And when you first read it, you think it's a science fiction, and then as you continue to realize you're creating machines that are learning from ontologies and from data, big data, and patterns, and creating connections that are on mass scale neural networks and things like that. And you have to, people could use that, just as we've seen today with, firearms and various other things. Something good that gets misused is no longer good. And so, I fully support artificial intelligence, machine learning, but there has to be that envelope of ethics and compliance and security and all those things around it. Otherwise, as I said before, is anything good to an extreme could turn out poorly and badly.
I think it just resonates, what to say here. You have to have those guardrails that you talked about, because then you mix in quantum computing. Now, that's going to complicate our threat environment, because now you can break things much faster. But for my business, I think AI right now is playing a critical role. I'm very optimistic about the applications. AI combined with algorithmic applications. You talk about the challenges we have around talent and shortage of talent. If we can now actually have clever algorithms that will address some transactions before humans have to touch them, they'll take out a lot of work. They'll create a lot of efficiencies, right? And in a good way. It kind of improves the quality of work that people do by augmenting AI and algorithms to help you with it.
I think the responsible AI is really how we need to proceed, because a lot of the human biases can be embedded or integrated with the AI, because humans are creating a lot of the algorithm initially. So that's something we gotta all pay attention to, because I think we can very easily create systems that are replicating a lot of the human challenge we have in humanity.
And AI is not, we still talk about it like it's new, and it's not nascent at all. I mean, if you think about National Grid, which is, again, as you said earlier, a British multinational utility, electricity balancing, people don't realize you still can't store electricity I know we all love the batteries in our cars and things like that, but on mass scale where we've got massive transmission of electricity, you have to balance how much you bring in or you lose it. And so we do artificial intelligence on things like what's the weather going to look like? When is there a World Cup soccer game on? When is the break going to be? Because everyone's going to open their fridge or start their tea kettle. And will we in a position to address that surge? And all of that takes a lot of commitment. But now take that and say, I want to know what that neighborhood's doing. I want to know what that person's doing. So we have that kind of AI now, but there's an ethics portion to it, even in today's level. So it's not that far off.
So I'm going to shift gear a little bit to the talent and culture aspect of the uncertainties they would deal with. So from my experience, when I looked at, when this pandemic happened a couple of years ago, the CEO and his direct reports, we were having meetings every morning, right? Every 7 days a week, 8 o'clock in the morning, we're touching base for 15 minutes. I think that brought the team together. Now, even though we are sometimes coming to the office, we're still in a hybrid, but we're continuing that tradition, not 7 days a week, probably 3 days a week. So that really kept us in the loop of all the changes and new things that are emerging. We were able to respond very quickly. So just want to touch, anything you did around that. I mean, how do you feel the uncertainties for the last couple of years brought your leadership team or executive team, whether the team that you're part of, your senior executive team, or the people that work for you, brought everybody together, and how has that impacted your ability to respond to next uncertainty or next challenge or next unknown that might come our way?
Shamim, I'll talk about what we did for the employees, because one of the things, and I do a lot of roundtables, just as I talked about, listen, and it was very clear 18 months or 2 years of working remotely, employees were working longer hours, were disengaged. As human beings, we like to interact socially. So at grassroots levels, and my directs and folks underneath them, they started an initiative called E2I, Engage to Inspire. And it was driven entirely by employees. And the goal was to bring in teams from various parts of the world, and various cultures, and help engage them in various problem solving, various initiatives. And a lot of time it was just having fun. But that created that human connection, even though it was virtually, and just really changed the dynamics. And then they were given an innovation challenge. Say, guys, here where we are, where the business is. We're not going to tell you what to solve, but figure out a business problem and solve. And we were just amazed at kind of solutions they brought in. Some of them were futuristic, but we found 3 that everybody voted on that we're actually funding. So having that rhythm is important. After that, now we have a lot of virtual rhythms every month. Every month we actually have everybody come together, celebrate birthdays and anniversaries. People will kind of talk about, what went on with them, any special events. And a lot of times this doesn't really contribute to pure productivity, but it's so important for mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, Shamim, I'd say one of the things I would share that really was powerful for our company is our business continuity teams. We have them at the business unit level as well as at the corporate level. And we really set up a structure and a cadence where these business continuity teams would bring the leadership team together at least once a day, more in the midst of the pandemic, depending on what was going on. And so we would get together, we would hear reports from all functions, we would get reports from the company, the corporate level, and really it was an amazing, process to channel up and down information to make sure we are responding to employee and business matters. I think how we came together to respond to the pandemic, I think made a huge difference for us, but also just the high leadership touch. From my perspective, an example I would share, I actually was very targeted in how I communicated with the leaders in my organization. I identified those leaders that had employees on site, that worked on site throughout the entire pandemic, and I made a point to just reach out to them and say, how you doing? Are you getting the help you need? And just that, that connection made a huge difference. And I did it, my leaders did it, and it just was very important to understand what's going on in employees and people's lives that you wouldn't otherwise know since we were in this remote environment. So that high-touch leadership was incredibly important the last couple of years.
You know, I completely agree with what's said, and I feel like now we're in a trough of disillusionment. It was such a high. It was a good to great inflection point. We all came together. There was a problem, you know, it was a big event. We called each other, we got on, you know, we had drop-in sessions for anyone that wanted to talk about how hard it is to have children at home that you were teaching while you were trying to share a computer and all of those things. And we created such a connection. Then the Great Resignation, then hybrid working, then people moved and worked from where they wanted to work. Then companies sort of like it but don't like it. And so if I fast forward from what I think was a tremendously bonding sort of event for companies, I think now we're struggling to figure out, you know, you have companies that say come in as planned or as needed, or, you know, work from anywhere, or we need you in 3 days a week, and employees are talking with their feet so I find myself, sorry for using a Gartner thing, I probably shouldn't say trough of disillusionment, but I do find that the reality is, and I don't know if you're all finding this or not, the marbles have been shifted. And while we can all say we're in a better place that we're, you know, remote working and doing, not everyone has found equilibrium, and you know, there's CEOs that want people in, and there's CEOs that say, I'm going to sell all our real estate, we don't need it, and there's employees. And so I think we're having another slight, after the earthquake, seismic shift, right? And so I don't know if you guys are seeing that as well, or if I'm the only one in.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You know, the days of just giving wages to talent and keeping you engaged are gone. They want a full 360 type engagement, you know, well-being, growth, learning, diversity, equity. So it's just, we're seeing that the change and the shift. And as a company, we are putting huge investments into DEI initiatives, huge investment in really upskilling the talent, which is so much needed at the pace of technology. But that's really what the future workforce needs, and that's what they're asking for.
Yeah. I come back to like what Mona said. You know, I think people do want to know that you care about them, right? So that's really so important, especially during time of massive uncertainty. And the information sharing is key, right? Whether we have the information or not, just telling them I don't have it, or we're working through this, that meant a lot to the associates. But I'll come back to you, Andy. What you mentioned is this Great Resignation and the talent. So from my perspective, the talent shortage is probably the biggest uncertainty that we all have to face and figure out. And I know each one of you are doing something different in your company to grow the talent and keep the talent and engagement up. I mean, if you can share a little bit on that, I mean, that'd be great. Mona, you wanna?
Shamim, I mean, you said it earlier, it's more than the pandemic.
Yeah.
The implications of the pandemic and some of the things we're seeing now around, inflation, geopolitics, social injustice, like there is so much going on in our world that's driving, employees and people to make different decisions. And, retirement, rates are on the rise. At the same time, there is not as many people entering the workforce. So there is this competition for the same talent. So as Vagesh said, it's not only paying people for a job anymore. It's much bigger than this. It's about the well-being and the whole picture for an employee. So we have to be flexible because the power is with the employee, and rightfully so. So we just now have to learn what these preferences are, what these patterns are, and how can we offer a value proposition that would want to keep people?
So for us, it's connecting to purpose. People, I completely agree with you and what you said, Mona, as well, relative to the preferences, what do people want, et cetera. But, and I won't even say the Gen Xers, Gen Y, so I think you have some late baby boomers that are now doing this as well. They want to connect to something and feel good about it. So when I used to recruit, I used to talk about the career path and, you know, how the different technologies we use, et cetera, and I certainly still do that. But I start with National Grid is at the heart of the energy future, of the transition, climate change, et cetera. And people want to connect to a purpose, whether it's hospitals, medicine, defending countries, and or being at the energy transition and saving the planet. Companies now are challenged to really have a compelling, why do you do what you do? Why is it important? Why should I come work for you? And so that's something that we're really trying to connect to. And it's a good recruiting, but you have to have the rest. It's sort of a 360 degree. You need to have all of those components together and be clear in your story.
Such an important point you make, Andy. The purpose, the mission. You know, I'm part of something much bigger, very, very important. You know, just a statistic. We hired thousands of people during the pandemic who's never set foot at a site, at a Raytheon Technology site. So now we're also finding ourselves, how do we actually make sure our team, our people are connecting to that purpose, to that, you know, vision of connecting the world, making the world a bigger place. I just had to double down on that one.
Yeah, so, but you know,
these two are my yin and yang. We're going to go open a company together, right?
but Mona, you said something that I want to come back to for a minute and double click. So you said not as many people are entering in the workforce, and to me that's a huge problem in the U.S. and probably globally. Absolutely. Because we need a lot more technical, digital kind of talent. Anything you're doing creative to groom the talent? Because we have to cultivate the talent, because we can fight among each other, right? I can steal from, you know, Vagesh or you know, Andy or you.
Well, a few parents should tell the kids, get out there and get a job, because you need to get off my payroll. That's one thing I did to my children. But
so there's a different side of this, right? I think we have an employee, and she came to me and said, Vagesh, there's a huge, you know, there's a portion of workforce. And she says, I was a work mom who stayed at home, and now my kids are grown up, and I came back to the workforce. And he says, a lot of them, they don't know really how to enter, or they don't want to work 40 hours a week, they only want 20 hours a week. So now we're actually using her as one of our ambassadors, where she's actually talking to, you know, their mom clubs, ISTs, you know, in schools, and really bringing back some of the experts that they were a great cybersecurity expert 8-10 years ago. I think we can use them 20 hours a week. I'll take that. Or somebody who was a great business analyst, you know, 10-15 years ago, and she was home taking care of the kids. They can come back, and I'll 10, 15, 20 hours a week, because now I'm getting highly skilled talent, you know, and we're flexible. So that's one avenue we're actually looking at. And obviously the traditional avenue of going to schools, retraining. We're also looking at our general business population and say, can we do low code, no code? Can we get, you know, citizen data scientists? Can we leverage some of them, because they can fill in the gap, because you don't have enough IT people.
So basically upskilling, reskilling, basically, so that's the thing. We have to be super creative in terms of what for creating talent, because it doesn't exist or it's not growing as fast as we need it. So, I mean, one thing, you know, we have done, you know, we have over 30-some thousand associates in the company, but not everybody's in technologies. So training them, giving them this opportunity, and then giving them assignments and working in the different projects they were learning. I mean, that's a great engagement booster. Also, it also helps us solve the problem of talent shortage. And you know, I did get my second daughter out of college last week, and she has a job. So
congratulations!
She's in cybersecurity, so I'm excited.
You know, a couple other things, just lowering the barriers of entry to the early career, you know, talent, right? The big engineering, you know, firms and technology firms, you know, you write up a job description and it's like every qualification known to man, you list it. And so going forward, I think we need to think differently about how we attract talent and lowering the barrier of entry so we can attract, you know, more talent and, you know, taking the opportunity to develop them where there are gaps. And lastly, I would say we talked a little bit about kind of the advent of AI and some of the unknowns around AI. That could be a powerful technology, again, to complement humans, right? How do we work together in this human, you know, machine world, right, in order to supplement our workforce? A lot of opportunity there.
I just want to follow up on what you said. I think this is you hear this everywhere. Companies are dropping requirements of having a degree, right? Instead of have the formal education, let's focus on skills.
So let's see, let's go back to another audience question. This is around gig economy. So given the conversation on candidate expectations, is the gig economy something you're factoring into your risk and opportunity planning?
I think we're factoring everything into our risk and
Right,
opportunity
that's-
planning. so-
Candidates'
I mean,
expectations.
that has to be in the consideration for everything we're doing. So anything specific you're doing?
Just trying to read the question here, conversation.
So candidates are expecting, because their expectation is a little bit out of line, as you know, like right now. I mean, I think, Andy, you said it very nicely, that we just don't know what the equilibrium is, because everybody has a different expectation. So what is the common ground? And that's the challenge I think we all are facing, and trying to understand what the new set of expectations, how do we create an environment where everybody can be happy. So ultimate flexibility is the key. But if you look at what's happening, like for example, it's a war for talent, but then a lot of, let's say, tech companies, and some of them might be in the room here, basically writing checks, blank checks, right? Okay, if somebody, let's say a college kid out of college, working for a year, and they get the offer from one of the tech companies for $100,000 more. So as an industry, how do we compete in that situation? We can't. It's not rational. And a lot of time, as you know, with the last several years, the economy has been really good, despite all the uncertainty we'll be dealing with. So companies are able to throw money at a lot of this. Some companies didn't even have to make money, profit, or anything else. So some of those are changing now. But nonetheless, it is a challenging talent market. I think what I love about our panel and some of the discussion we had is around culture. And if we create a good environment where they feel like that people can grow and they're valued and they're empowered, guess what? They will stay. And it's not always going to be the money. So that's really how I would answer it. I don't know if you have any other perspective you want to share.
Yeah, I think it's like the question. I think is talking about the fit, right? I think it has to match. If your expectation is to have a gig, then it's the right fit, right skill sets, right? Because like you say, you cannot compete with fairy dust and unicorns, but you can give somebody a very stable path, a fulfilling career, purpose-driven, and that's what they want, and that's a different side of the equation to that.
Okay. So I'm going to actually thank the panelists. Because let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we're not quite done yet, because I did ask each one of them to share a piece of advice for the audience based on what they learned over the last couple of years to prepare for the uncertain world and the next set of uncertainties. So I'm going to start with maybe Vagesh this time. Vagesh,
Sure.
what would be one
First
piece
of all, thank you all for, I know you had choices to go to other sessions. Hopefully we met with your time. So I'll reiterate what I said. I think it's so important to have that human touch now and listen. Connect with your entire ecosystem, your partners, your vendors, your employees, your customers, and just listen. Because I think with remote work, with virtual world, having that human touch, building those relationships, having that trusted relationship where they can come to you and share with you will give you that edge where you can see things around the corners.
Mona?
Thank you again for being here. I would say, as terrible as the pandemic was on all of us and the world, there was actually silver lining in it for some, right? As CIO, when I see the culture change that was enforced by the pandemic, I come from some businesses that where people had to be on site. They had to be in their seats 8 to 5. There was not even an acknowledgement that could work in a hybrid environment and be productive. In my mind, as CIO, the silver lining was the pandemic taught us that we could work anywhere, anytime, and be productive and be safe. And so while we learned, a lot from the pandemic, and it was hard on many of us, there is always those silver nuggets. Let's take advantage of them. Let's learn the lessons, and let's apply that for whatever the next unknown is. But I'll also echo, just know where your critical assets are. And by assets, not only your products that you sell, but your people, right? And how do you create more resiliency around those critical assets that are meaningful to keep your business going? So those are just a couple of my thoughts here.
So for me, I couldn't echo more of what both Vagesh and Mona said, but for me, it's learn how to manage change. We all think we're good at it, and when something as big as the pandemic or geopolitical or weather or anything like that hits, we all, whether we admit it or not, and we want to be leaders to our families first, we want to be leaders at work, we want to be leaders, but change management is such an overused phrase, but so underappreciated. And so we have to learn, right? Some of us say stuck in, oh, this is going to pass. When March 13th hit, 2020, I remember saying to myself, I better enjoy the next 3 weeks because this is going to be able to work out and stay home and all that. And then 2 years later, my husband and I were in Naples, Florida, and now I'm trying to figure out new normal and where we are, having to come back into Boston and whatnot. And so change management internally for yourselves and ourselves, our teams and our organizations and family is a skill that if I gave any advice to young, old, career or family, heads of family would be study it, learn it, understand the cycles that you're in, et cetera. I learned one thing and one of my kids' names is this too, the Sarah cycle. And I constantly ask myself, where am I on the Sarah cycle? Shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, hope. And whether it's your tax bill or the pandemic, you get through it really fast, or sometimes you permeate around it, but really, really learn change management. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Andy, and the panelists. So for me, for the date was actually March 17 for us. So we just had our fiscal year that ended end of February of 2020, and we had a record year. We had absolutely best year, and we're very excited about 2020. And then March 17 is when we had to shut down our entire business in the whole country. Basically, business went like 85% down overnight, and it was scary. But then, as you can tell, world didn't end. Just this year, so our new fiscal year ended end of February of 2022. And we had a new record. It's much higher than the record that we hit in the end of 2019, early 2020. So the moral of the story is the world is not going to end. Take a deep breath. And really, to your point, really focus on building agility and resiliency. Because as long as you focus on agility and resiliency, we'll be fine. Yes, there are going to be a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of things we cannot predict. Unknowns don't always have to be bad or scary. It is unknown. And we'll figure out. We'll make the best out of it. Because I have faith in humanity, faith in our intelligence, faith in our ability, especially technology leaders. We have tremendous capability to steer our teams, steer our companies, steer our organizations for something much better. And so whatever next uncertainty comes, at the end, we'll be in a better place because we have done the right things and we have focused on agility and resiliency. So with that, I'm going to wrap up again. Let's give this panelists a great round of applause.
Thank you. You did a great job.